moderator, Reem Abdelazim. This is Luis Saha, very excited to have you. You are Angela, and we have online Joe and Erica. Yes? So I wanted to start with my first question to you, Luis, because I think it's amazing that you're here. You're a former football player for Manchester United, Équipe de France, among other teams. So, you know, you've experienced life as a professional athlete in one of the best teams in the world, top teams. And now you're also the CEO and founder of Access Stars, a private community for pro athletes and entertainers. And you recently joined the advisory board of Sega Europe. So why did you join, and what's your vision for the future?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very honored to be here. That's why I traveled. And I was very honored when Emmanuel and Katie asked me to be a part of the Sega Europe advisory board, be a Sega champion as well. So those are the normal evolution for me as a pro athlete who's seen the kind of trouble that players, athletes, or entertainers through my career. We discussed and we could see that there is a lot of things could be changed, could be improved, could be communicated better. So I think that to have easily identify Sega as an organization that were able to give us the visibility, but to understand, oh, okay, there is some people who really understand, really want to contribute, sacrifice time for a better message to be thrown to our youth and to the next generation. So it was very, very important for me. Now being the founder of Access Stars, it's very important because I want to really get that environment that really it's needed for them to develop. As much as we say they have the best entourage and best advisors, it's a reality sometimes, but a lot of the time it's not enough. There is need of better transparency, better tools, better organization partnership that makes sense for them to be role models, because they are the best ambassador of our sports. And sometimes the quicker way to make the value that we know that are good for our children to be stronger to what we see at the moment. There is a lot of bad messages, a lot of bad examples that we want to kick out first of sport, but obviously in the society.
Yeah. And you feel like, you know, having come from such a high position in sports and being such a, you know, recognized athlete, you think that really helped you be able to change that message and drive that forward?
That's for sure. It does open doors. It does provide me a platform where I experience for myself, and I say, oh, that's not normal. You know, recognize, for example, the problems that maybe agents have when they've been asked to work long terms with a client, with a player who is young, who needs really to be, you know, giving the right environment. Yeah. They've been asked to work long term when they sign only 2 years with the player. So don't tell me you actually help integrity. Those guys need then to be very aggressive. Yeah. So all those things I experience myself, and as maybe a high profile, I say, oh, as a high profile, I still see the same thing, and I can understand that on the lower level, it will be the same. So that was very important, as I said, to be naturally going into that. Even if I wanted to do coaching, if I wanted to do punditry and all those things, I think it was important for me to sacrifice a bit of time to talk to different organizations, different stakeholders, to make a change, to make a, yes, I think a movement that makes sense.
They're lucky to have you driving for that change. Moving over to you, Angela. The Sega Champions Program, of which Luisa is actually a member, provides athletes with both recognition and a platform to amplify their commitment to integrity. What would your message be to brands and athletes who are not aligned with Sega?
If you don't mind, I think it's important to back up a little bit to give some context. I'm Angela LaChica, president of LaChica Sports Group, and our company is at the intersection of athlete management, athlete impact and sport management, really focusing on social justice issues in the United States. So, and I'm proud to say, weaving into previous conversations today, that we're an all-female-led team. There's 9 of us women. I think it's important not only for a seat at the table, but we're all the decision makers and the leaders. So we're advising the professional athletes. It's a team of women advising the NFL on what to do with their social justice funds. So I wanted to give a shameless plug to that, because I am all for helping one another. Amazing. But backing up, our group helped advise a group of athletes back in 2017 after Colin Kaepernick took a knee, asking the NFL to do something about what was happening in the communities their players were coming from. So our group went very intentionally to the commissioner and outlined a plan asking not only for money and resources, but also for the platform that came with the NFL. So our players were able to negotiate an $89 million contribution to social justice causes in 2017, the largest contribution from a corporation ever committed to social justice issues. But with that also came recognition on the field. You see End Racism in the sidelines now. You see a social justice month dedicated throughout the NFL. So the players really wanted that interleague support, but also they wanted to be able to have a platform to speak about these issues on the systemic level that were impacting their communities, around criminal justice reform, around police and community relations. So we've been very fortunate to be in a position and be prepared to present these athletes with very intentional and responsible ways to use their platform that has resulted in change, 26 pieces of legislation. It's millions of dollars to community groups that are doing a lot of good work on the ground. So we've been very proud to be at this position right now.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't make the introduction at the beginning. Thank you for that. And what are the key risks and benefits for these athletes that choose to stand up for sport integrity and call out, issues in the public forum? How does that work? Yeah,
that's a good question. And athlete activism certainly isn't new. It's been happening for decades. But most recently, I think when you saw going back to 2016, 2017 in the NFL, it was very risky for athletes to speak out. They're non-guaranteed contracts in the NFL. They did not have that support. So it took some seasoned veteran players who were well respected to the league to go and have these very difficult and candid conversations with team ownership and with the commissioner. They were respected. They came with a plan. They said, this is what we're looking for, and they were very intentional about their ask. But we saw a lot of players who wanted to come out and support. If we were doing issues around gun violence in America or education equity, a lot of players who were younger and didn't know where their team ownership stood would only support behind the scenes. They'd jump on a call with an elected official. Maybe they'd do some social media support. And then we had players who were at Capitol Hill testifying. So we created these different levels of engagement to make it very easy for athletes to get involved and lend their support, no matter what that looked like.
Amazing, very cool. Joe, over to you. As Vice President and Head of Brand Partnerships at Overtime, could you share your perspective of how brands perceive athlete activism and whether they're doing enough to support or to suppress that?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. Calling in from Los Angeles. So good morning and good afternoon to everybody out there. So just for context, about a year ago, we started a professional basketball league for elite high school players based in Atlanta, based on 5 pillars. And those pillars were sports science. So teaching these young athletes what to put in their body, what to eat, how to hydrate, and just overall take care of themselves, teaching them economic empowerment. These athletes are professional basketball players, and you can imagine a professional basketball player at 16, 17, 18, they don't know what to do with their money. So we're teaching them what to do with their money, how to invest, what investment terms even mean. Another pillar is basketball development, and then education. So a curriculum that's tailored to them, 4-to-1 student to teacher ratio. We hired the principal of the year from Washington, D.C., Maisha Riddlesberger, to lead that. And just making sure the curriculum is tweaked so that they're getting what they need out of it, rather than just getting something that's sort of cookie cutter from an education standpoint. And then the 5th pillar is athlete activism. So teaching these young athletes to have a point of view. You think about the modern NBA players, Chris Paul, Carmelo Anthony, LeBron, they have a very strong POV. And so we're helping give them guidance on how to have a point of view as young athletes. And so wrapping all those up, we're essentially getting them ready for the NBA, which will be the next stage of their professional career. And they'll go in much more ready than some of the other athletes that are one and done or just coming straight from high school.
Wow, amazing, truly. Super cool that, you know, these kids can have someone like you from the very beginning and or earlier on in their careers where they actually know what to do and where to go, and having someone just being a role model for them from the very beginning. And Erica, I'm moving over to you, fellow Olympian. Actually thrilled you're here today, and I'm very interested to hear your perspective on some of these things. Erica, you've been a strong advocate for change, and as Olympic champion, you have a voice to be heard. So how does being successful in sport help amplify athletes' voices, and do you feel athletes that achieve prominence, like yourself, have a responsibility to speak up for others?
Yeah, good morning from Calgary, Canada. You can't tell. I'm calling in from Canada today, and it's an honor to be here on the call with Joe, Angela, and Luis, and as well as you, Reem. It's really interesting. I think we have, Joe, who talked about a professional sports league for high school boys, I would assume. Angela talked about advocating for NFL male athletes. Luis obviously has his experience being a male soccer player. And I think it's really important to have a diversity of voices at the table and representing female athletes who have, limited professional careers. I was an athlete in the sport of Olympic freestyle wrestling. I always say wrestling's the oldest, greatest sport in the world. It's very limited barriers to entry, and we have one of the most diverse, globally diverse Olympic podiums across many, many Olympic Games. And so it's a sport where no matter what you look like, how big or how tall, the size that you are, where you come from, you can have success in sport. And I think that really gets to the basis of what sport is. It's an opportunity to step on a field or a mat or a court and bring the best version of yourself forward. And I really believe that wrestling provides a global opportunity for that, for people, anyone all over the world, especially female athletes. And even in the US, I think Angela and Joe are both there. And women's wrestling is the #1 emerging sport at the NCAA level. And that's, based on just a history of barriers for women to get onto the mats in different states. And so it's a really great time, I think, for women in sport all over the world. And Reem, your question was about me as an Olympic champion and how success in sports provides a platform for advocacy. And I don't think it makes it any easier. I think that we saw at the last 2020 Olympic Games that happened in Tokyo, Simone Biles spoke out about her challenges with mental health. And she actually came from such a place of, I think, values-based decision-making and a place of extreme privilege, which is interesting to say as an African-American female athlete in the sport of gymnastics, considering the experiences that she's been very vulnerable about as a victim of abuse in sport. But despite all that, she still came forward and made a values-based decision about deciding not to compete at the Olympic Games. And so I think that is a really telling example about the power that athletes have with success to be able to make decisions, and still how challenging it is. I know in my sport, I'm still a current athlete in sport freestyle wrestling. The Wrestling World Championships are happening right now in Serbia. And I made the decision to not compete this year because I needed to take time away from sport because of the maltreatment in sport that I've experienced, and that was very rampant in my national sport organization, and I think, in experiences that I had within my local club. And so I think even that being said, as I've been a very outspoken advocate for sport at the level, and Angela talked about the different ways that athletes can create change, at that government level, at the grassroots level, being outspoken and advocate on social media. And it definitely takes, integrated, intersectional approach to create change. I really tried to be an outspoken advocate at the policy level to be able to create change that's going to have a ripple down effect for athletes for generations to come. But I still don't think that's enough. And I still think it's really challenging. And, I decided to become an advocate in sport because I won the Olympic Games, I won World Championship medals, Commonwealth Games medals, and no one could take that away from me. And so I had no fear to speak out. but I still faced retribution. I still faced negativity in my sport culture. And, I think sport is the sum total, culture is the sum total of what we celebrate and what we tolerate. And I think sport has a long way to go when we look at in mainstream media and down to grassroots sports organizations. What are the behaviors and values that we're celebrating and that we're tolerating, because that's what's defining the culture. And I think we know that sport does have a culture problem.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And this is an ongoing story that keeps happening in sports with both females and males, but lately with females. And Erica, I know there's so much going on in Canada, which is my next point to you, so I'm coming back. But for now, we're gonna go back to you, Luis. And I wanted to ask you, how will Sega Europe, in your opinion, help to unite all stakeholders and especially athletes behind integrity?
It is very important. I've a lot of experience and see what Angela just mentioned. The fact that the players being together, educated, given a plan, an easy plan to understand, and then just like push it with their influence. It's the only way you're gonna have like real, every kind of audiences looking into it concretely. That's the issue. But it's really hard to put the players into this process. It's really hard to get the attention of the entourage if you don't speak to the right agent around them. They are not interested in things that are not commercially good for them. Some of those big players sometimes are really focused on their career, so it's really hard. You don't have like many windows to actually get them on something. So this is where the actual concise plan is very important. But it's vital because the youth more and more are taking the athletes as role models, and we are not maybe prepared. We don't understand it, and then sometimes it's getting out of control. You have to have an organization. You have to have so many people around you able to get you focused on that as well. It's really important to understand this duty and to understand the impact that you have. And then when you have that, I think you get that confidence that you need to do anything you want in life. But to have so much, I would say, impact and power into your hands, you have to really understand how to use it. Otherwise, you don't do nothing. And that's what is happening at the moment. So to be in the SIGA Europe Advisory Board is to really help this organization to really understand those parameters, those kind of like barriers, invisible barriers that you can face, and to make these changes happen.
Great point, Luis. Thank you.
And
Please.
if I could add to that point, after in 2020, when we watched George Floyd's brutal murder, there was a real shift in the league support for the players. So the leagues realized they could no longer not listen to their players and ignore these issues. And so we saw a lot of groups. We helped form Black Players for Change out of MLS, Black Women's Collective, Players Collective with NWSL. We saw a lot of leagues become really supportive of their players. And fortunately, we were prepared to give them kind of that playbook to go to league and say, this is what support looks like and this is what we want. And so now you're seeing a huge shift, at least in the United States, on support when it comes to players and they're feeling like they're organized and together and can collectively speak out.
That's a very important point, because when you see the difference, there is a problem of culture. The US in particular, in this example, are more courageous, and obviously it ended up to be a very horrific event to make the changes. That's not normal. And we need to be more courageous, and some of us as athletes need to be courageous. Some of the organization need to be courageous. Whatever the actual cause is, there is a lack of courage, and I'm part of it because I was hiding behind my career during my career, because I was like focused, and family matters, and I wanted to do the best for them. I was a bit selfish, but now with another platform, with another time frame, I recognize all that, and I say, that's my time. I have to contribute way more. And then what Angela is saying is very, very important. We need to recognize the cultural barriers, and some of the guys who are sitting behind the desk, making like decisions, signing policies and marketing campaign, they should be highlighted and exposed, because that's not good enough. That's as simple as that. That's not normal to wait for like brutal things to happen to actually move and be forced to, oh, okay. No, that's not normal. We should expose them, and the stronger we come and the more organized we come, I think they have to do it.
Yeah, thank you for being the brave people who are doing that for them. I can't imagine how things could have been when I was an athlete, having that and having the support of, an alliance like Sega, and just having that sort of support and bravery to come forward and say what's wrong and what's happening in an organization and why are we not talking about these things. And I think that's a whole other conversation. But Joe, I'll get back to you with another question. Over time, places a strong focus on emerging athlete talent. And, I just said, I've had some difficulties as an athlete, but as an Olympic coach also, I found it very difficult to stay silent about certain issues, but I wasn't sure, at the moment within the team, what was the right thing to do? Is it okay to have, a stronger voice, or is it best to just keep thinking of what's happening with the athletes and make sure, I wait and be more patient with time? So my question to you is, how comfortable are you with athlete activism, as well as coach activism, from an emerging athlete perspective? And is being outspoken a potential red flag for career progression in sport? If so, what can be done to embrace activism? Feel free to answer the first two, and then we can get to the third one.
Sure. So where I'll start though is I want to go back to something that Erica said, because we talked about Overtime Elite being just boys, and right now it is just boys because the rules right now were not equitable until this year. And so for women to go to the WNBA, they have to play 4 years of college basketball. For men, they only have to play 1. And so we're looking into now how we can change that up because it's important to us as well. But the rules need to change too, right? And so that's part of that and why it is only boys at this point. But the NIL rules will help us do that. To your question, the second question, I guess, is it's not a red flag at all. We encourage our athletes to have a voice, to be able to make choices. It's why we started Overtime Elite. We're not trying to take on the NCAA, but we want to give another option, another path for athletes, different than what is the perceived norm. And so we also started a football league for high school aged players. It's a chance for them to show their personalities, the culture of the areas they represent. Football is all about people with helmets on. This gives an opportunity in 7-on-7 for them to take their helmets off. And NIL has also changed athletes' abilities to advocate for themselves. They're not at the mercy of the NCAA anymore. And so, yeah, there's a money component to it, but these athletes are also making decisions on their own and what's best for themselves. And so I think the NIL rules have significantly changed how the ecosystem works. And that's, I consider activism to be a part of all of that. And so it's basically just these athletes being able to advocate for themselves. And then we work with the brands that are lean in and want to be a part of that advocacy.
And thank you, Joe. And just out of curiosity, what about coaches also? I know athletes are getting more and more support now, but does this, like you going for that change and driving for it, do you see situations where coaches also kind of need to speak up and sometimes they're having trouble with doing so, or they do actually more than they should? Like, how's that?
Yeah, I'll speak more specifically to our coaches. And so Kevin Ollie is our head coach. He led UConn to the national championship in 2014. But he's helping not only the athletes with their voice, but he has a very strong voice. And I think that the team that he's put around him, the team of coaches, are all coaches who have had their own experiences, whether they were former NBA players or they coached in the NCAA. They've all had some twists and turns along their career. And so we're giving them that, the ability to have a platform to express and basically change the narrative of some of their own careers. Excellent.
Thank you, Joe. Erica, back to you. What's your perspective on some of the things that have been happening lately in Canada? I just told you about some of the things that there's just been a lot going on with Canada, whether it's been, the artistic swimming team or the gymnastics. And How will the outcome be used to safeguard sport in Canada, in your opinion?
Yeah, great question, Reem. I think it's a challenge. We thankfully have a great minister of sport who, and government that's committed to providing the resources that can support these types of, that can support a holistic, non-objective and bipartisan approach to addressing these impact in sports. And I would not say it's limited to just artistic swimming or artistic gymnastics. We've had athletes come forward in the bobsled skeleton national teams, the rugby women's team. In my own sport in wrestling in 2018, there was an independent investigation and a 60-page report with 42 recommendations outlining the culture of physical, emotional, sexual, and verbal abuse of athletes. And so, yeah, it's been a tough time to be a Canadian athlete in sport. And then you have to try and figure out a way to compete during a pandemic. Like, come on, people. Yeah. not easy. But I think, challenge and constraint is what inspires people to innovate. We've seen that in business and we've seen that in sport, and to rise above these challenges and to succeed. We, as a country, are creating an independent sport governing body funded by the SDRCC, which is which they are already our governing body around ethics in sport, from a sport arbitration component. And I just think right now that the processes to bring forward complaints and the processes to adjust change are broken. I think that, obviously we need to have a policy-driven approach, but we also need to have a community-driven approach that's educating athletes, coaches, community stakeholders at all levels around what is acceptable, what is the sport culture that we want to bring forward, and how can we create that change. I had an experience where the club coach at the club that I trained at when I was a high school athlete, I witnessed a verbal interaction that was not aligned with the safe sport culture that athletes and coaches sign as part of the code of conduct. And so I went to, this is just such a small example, but a really good example of how at the implementation level, these things are broken. And I'm an Olympic champion. I went to the club head coach and I brought forward this concern, and the club coach just went directly to the coach and said, "Erica's trying to complain about you. I don't know what's going on." And it just created this huge nightmare within this one club. And so you can see why athletes are so scared to come forward, because there's not appropriate mechanisms to safeguard complaints. I don't think coaches are ready to understand that they need to change and shift. And it's really interesting. I'd love to hear, Angela's perspective on how do we create that change. Obviously it's a totally different landscape within the NFL with multi-million-dollar contracts. And I think there's a mirror being held up to the organization from, corporate America, and potentially in Europe as well with Louise. But it's really challenging because I think, again, that's, so when we think about the microcosm that sport is on society, we see the best and the worst of what we bring forward as humanity. And the challenge around changing for the better is a very important cause, a very important thing that we need to do, but it is so challenging. And I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know how the Gymnastics Canada is going to move forward. So that's, a list of over 100 women that have come forward and are looking to bring a class action lawsuit against Gymnastics Canada, similar to what we've seen in the US with the USA Gymnastics, not centered around one individual, but centered around, a number of coaches across the nation that, were allowed to continue with their sport despite, the knowledge of the governing body. And so I think board of directors, executives need to come forward and take ownership over the lack of accountability and understand that we're in a new era where these actions are no longer tolerated and these individuals are no longer have a place in sport. I think we need to draw a hard line in the sand and, create a new framework for how we coach, for how we operate as organizations, and, for what we celebrate in terms of the athletes on the field of play, as well as the behaviors in locker rooms. And I think that's something that every single person needs to take ownership over.
Yeah, I thank you for a great elaborate answer. I think we're moving in the right direction. I think Sega is helping so much with putting all this into place. Again, moving forward, being brave, educating, implementing, holding, you know, the people in charge accountable. This is all we need to do to just make sure we're stepping forward and we're doing the right thing. So thank you so much for a super insightful session. I wish I was a little bit less nervous at the beginning, but we got through. And thank you. If you have anything else you'd like to share.
I would like just to, Emmanuel and Katie has done a great job, and they has worked really hard on the SIGA rating system, for helping sport organization. When I try to make sure it's like people understand the concrete about all those panels that comes, and goes, that's a problem. What is important is like, okay, how people can really get accountable, as you mentioned, is because they get standard, they get understanding, this is the thing I need to do. Yes, maybe mentors or maybe players have to do or whatever. So rating is very important.
Yeah,
yes, because otherwise people sit down and hide, and no, action needs to be rewarded. Yeah. And from that, maybe some others will say, oh, hang on a minute, because we are all competitors. Yeah, we say about sport, I think it's important that we recognize that the rating system that they have put in place will help sport organization to really understand, okay, I have to do more. I can't sit in my back in my desk. That's not good enough.
Yeah, 100% agree. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and to add real quick, I think SIGA plays a crucial role in athlete advocacy, and I just appreciate being a part of this conversation. I think it allows the athletes to find a safe place to land when they're looking for answers and when they're looking for the right construct of how they use their platform. And I am committing all of my resources to you all. Any way that we can help, you know that. I'm a huge champion of you all. I speak about you guys all the time. So I just appreciate you all making athlete activism such an important part of the conversation, and women's leadership, but I'll go on all day about that.
Okay, thank you so much again for everyone. Thanks for having us.